Emily Carter was the picture of perfection in white silk and lace. Hours later, she vanished without a trace. Daniel Rivers, her new husband, was found the next morning, locked in the trunk of his own car, bruised, drugged, and unable to remember how the night ended. Rachel Moore, the bride's best friend, wept for the cameras, but behind closed doors she held secrets worth killing for. Caleb Price, the ex who was never supposed to return, reappeared just in time to become the perfect suspect. And Detective Leo Grant, chasing shadows through wedding vows and bloodstains, knew one thing: this wasn't a love story gone wrong. This was a plan executed with chilling precision, and someone had written the ending long before the vows were ever exchanged. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. The gardens behind the Rivers estate shimmered with golden lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from oak branches, and the scent of lavender floated through the air. The guests described it as something out of a dream. Emily Carter had never looked more radiant, walking down the aisle in a flowing lace gown, her smile bright and full of promise. Daniel Rivers, composed and confident, waited with quiet anticipation, his tailored suit pressed and perfect. The ceremony was heartfelt, the vows sincere, and when they kissed under the arch of white roses, the crowd erupted in cheers. The reception that followed was just as grand. Music played through the night, champagne flowed freely, and laughter echoed under the open sky. Emily danced with her father, then with Daniel, then with her friends. People captured every moment on their phones, a picture-perfect celebration. Rachel Moore, the maid of honor, gave a touching speech that brought tears to many eyes. The night seemed endless, wrapped in warmth and joy. But sometime around midnight, the magic unraveled. It began subtly. The bride was no longer on the dance floor. A few guests assumed she had gone to change out of her dress or stepped away for a moment. No one panicked. After all, brides often slipped away for a breather. Daniel had been seen heading toward the bridal suite earlier, and it was assumed they were together, maybe taking a quiet moment alone. But as the minutes turned into nearly an hour, people began to ask questions. A bridesmaid checked the suite. The room was tidy, but empty. The wedding dress was there, oddly, neatly folded on a velvet chair. Emily's shoes were beside it, placed carefully as if by someone preparing for bed. But Emily was gone. Her phone was found on the dresser. The screen had several missed calls, some from Rachel, and one from an unknown number. The last outgoing text had been sent at 11:21 p.m. It read simply, "Be right back." That was the last trace of her. Daniel, too, was nowhere to be seen. Some guests speculated that the couple had left early for their honeymoon. Others weren't so sure. Daniel's luggage was still in the suite, his wallet on the table, and his car, a sleek black Jaguar, still parked near the venue entrance. As the night deepened and the guests began to leave, an air of unease replaced the earlier joy. Rachel grew visibly anxious. She kept pacing, calling Emily's number again and again, only to hear it go straight to voicemail. By 3 a.m., the venue staff began shutting down. The DJ packed up. The lights dimmed. But a few close friends and family stayed behind, whispering to each other, their smiles now replaced by furrowed brows. Emily's parents, visibly shaken, contacted the local police, unsure if they were overreacting or not reacting fast enough. Then, just before dawn, a chilling discovery changed everything. A jogger taking a shortcut through the woods, 3 miles from the venue, noticed something strange. A black car, barely visible off the road, hidden behind a cluster of tall trees. The license plate matched Daniel's Jaguar. Police arrived within 15 minutes. They opened the trunk. Inside, unconscious and barely breathing, was Daniel Rivers. His wrists were tied with plastic zip ties. His suit was torn, and a dark bruise bloomed across his temple. He had no shoes. His wedding ring was missing. He had no idea where Emily was. Suddenly, this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something far more sinister. The bride was gone, the groom was drugged and dumped in his own car, and there were no signs of a struggle. No screams had been heard, no alarms raised during the celebration. Whoever had done this had moved in silence, in the shadows of a joyful night, and vanished just as quietly. The fairy tale had ended. The nightmare had begun. The discovery of Daniel Rivers, locked inside the trunk of his own luxury sedan, sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Rosehill. Word spread quickly, first among the guests who hadn't yet left town, then across social media, and finally through local news outlets. The once idyllic image of the newlyweds had been shattered overnight, replaced by a haunting mystery that no one could yet explain. Police cordoned off the wooded area where the car had been found. The vehicle was parked at an awkward angle, its tires partially sunk into the muddy earth, as though someone had driven it hastily and without care. There were no tire tracks leading in, no footprints around the car, and no signs of forced entry on the vehicle itself. It was almost as if it had been dropped from the sky and abandoned. Inside the trunk, Daniel had been curled up in an unnatural position, barely conscious. The zip ties around his wrists had cut into the skin, suggesting he had struggled for hours. His eyes fluttered open briefly as paramedics lifted him out, but he couldn't speak. His small puncture wound on his neck drew immediate attention. The theory emerged quickly: he'd been drugged. Lab results later confirmed the presence of a powerful sedative, something not easily obtained without a prescription. It raised a terrifying question: who had access to such a substance, and why would they use it on him? Back at the Rivers estate, the wedding venue was transformed from a place of joy to a crime scene. The bridal suite was combed for evidence. Forensic teams dusted for prints, scanned for biological samples, and searched every inch of the room for signs of a struggle, but what they found only deepened the mystery. There was no evidence of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. The suite looked almost untouched, a champagne glass still half full, rose petals still scattered across the bed, and yet the atmosphere was undeniably wrong. Emily's dress was still folded as it had been hours earlier. Her bouquet rested on the nightstand. Her phone, unlocked, displayed the last text she had sent: "Be right back." She never returned. Security cameras at the venue were reviewed immediately. The footage revealed Emily entering the suite just after 11:40 p.m. Her expression was unreadable, neither joyful nor afraid. It was a neutral calm, almost too composed. The hallway hangry outside the suite showed no one entering or leaving after her. The next morning, that same hallway was filled with officers and hotel staff. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. More chilling still was the car itself. The driver's seat had been adjusted to a position too far back for Emily to have comfortably driven it. That ruled out the theory that she had taken Daniel by force. But if not her, then who? Detectives found Daniel's wallet in the glove compartment, but his phone was missing. Strangely, the car's GPS had been manually disabled. When reconnected, it revealed nothing. The car had been wiped clean of fingerprints, except for Daniel's, and one partial print on the rear door handle too smudged to immediately identify. What puzzled investigators most was the fact that the car was locked. All the doors, including the trunk. No broken glass, no signs of entry. Yet someone had managed to put Daniel inside, seal it from the outside, and disappear. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. This wasn't the work of a panicked criminal. It was controlled, calculated, and chillingly precise. As Daniel was rushed to the hospital, still too sedated to speak, the search for Emily intensified. Helicopters scanned the nearby woods. Divers were called to check ponds and creeks within a 10-mile radius. Nothing. Theories began to spiral. Some whispered that Emily had planned her own disappearance. Others suggested she had been taken by someone with a personal vendetta. But none of it explained Daniel. Why drug him? Why leave him alive? The deeper the investigators looked, the more the puzzle expanded. And at the heart of it all was one impossible question. What happened to Emily Carter after midnight on her wedding night? While police scoured the surrounding woods, questioned guests, and rewatched hours of wedding footage, one detail quietly emerged from the background. a small, seemingly insignificant visit Emily Carter had made just weeks before the wedding. At the time, no one thought much of it. Not her family, not her friends, not even Rachel Moore, her closest confidant and maid of honor. But to Detective Leo Grant, it was the first shadow on the perfect image everyone painted of Emily's life. Security footage from the Rosehill County Courthouse showed Emily walking in alone on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She wore a hooded coat, no makeup, and looked over her shoulder twice before entering. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m. She stayed inside for exactly 47 minutes. There was no official appointment on record, but surveillance logs confirmed she signed into the visitors' registry under her maiden name. The man she had come to see was Caleb Price. Caleb had just been released from a medium-security prison 3 months earlier after serving a 5-year sentence for aggravated assault. The name had barely come up in Emily's life since college, but old friends remembered him well. Emily's first love, a troubled, intense relationship that ended abruptly after he was arrested in a bar fight that left someone hospitalized. Emily had never spoken about him again. She moved on. She met Daniel. She built a new life. So why visit Caleb now? Detective Grant had the footage enhanced. Emily looked tense as she walked out of the building. Her eyes were red, but her face was hard, determined. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't answer a call that came through as she stepped off the courthouse steps. The number belonged to Rachel Moore. The call lasted 6 seconds. No one answered. When police questioned Rachel about it, she insisted Emily had only mentioned Caleb once in passing. Something vague about closure, about needing to face the past before moving on. But if that were true, why hadn't Emily told Daniel, or anyone else? Why the secrecy? That same afternoon, Caleb disappeared from his assigned halfway house. No one had seen him since. He didn't take anything with him, not his clothes, not his phone, not even the state-issued debit card ex-cons used to re-enter society. He was simply gone. Suddenly, suspicion turned toward Caleb as the missing link, a violent past, a sudden vanishing, and a hidden visit from a woman who would soon go missing herself. It was a lead too significant to ignore. Detectives searched for any trace of contact between Caleb and Emily after that visit. Emily's phone records were clean, too clean. Not a single call or message, but when investigators pulled metadata from her phone's location history, they found a strange anomaly. A signal ping near an abandoned farm outside Rosehill 2 weeks before the wedding. The device had stayed there for over an hour. That location happened to be less than a mile from where Caleb's uncle had once lived, a property now condemned and forgotten. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the implications hung heavy in the air. Had Emily been lured into something? Had she tried to help him? Or worse, had she planned something with him? But the timing didn't add up. If Caleb had taken her, why wait until the night of the wedding? Why show no signs of struggle or force? Why drug Daniel instead of harming him? Even more troubling was what came next. A trace of Caleb's DNA was found in the honeymoon suite, not on the bed, not on Emily's dress, but on the door handle of the bathroom. It was faint, partial, but enough to confirm that he had been there. Emily had kept this secret for a reason, but no one could guess what it was. Love, fear, guilt. All anyone knew for sure was that the past Emily tried to bury had clawed its way back on the night she was meant to start a new life. And now, with Caleb on the run and Emily vanished without a trace, it seemed the truth was buried somewhere between a forgotten history and a carefully staged crime. The search for Emily Carter had now stretched into its 4th day, and the case was shifting from hope to horror. Police had canvassed the woods, rivers, abandoned buildings, and even private properties surrounding the wedding venue. But it wasn't a search team or a detective who found the first true sign of what might have happened. It was a hotel maid named Sophia, scheduled to clean the honeymoon suite after authorities had completed their initial sweep. As Sophia moved the heavy bed frame to vacuum underneath, she noticed something unusual. A faint, rust-colored smear on the wooden floorboards. She paused, peered closer, and saw more streaks, thin, dried, and trailing outward, as if something had been dragged just slightly before vanishing beneath the frame. She alerted the front desk. Within an hour, Detective Leo Grant and a forensic team returned to the suite, this time determined to look beyond what the surface had revealed. Luminol testing lit the room up like a crime scene in a movie. Blood had seeped into the cracks between the floorboards. Not enough for a massive injury, but more than a minor cut. Samples were taken immediately. Within the day, results confirmed what everyone feared. The blood belonged to Emily Carter. The fact that it had gone unnoticed during the first investigation suggested one disturbing possibility. Someone had cleaned the room after whatever had happened that night. But who? And forensics examined the entire suite again, this time taking apart vents, checking behind furniture, and even inspecting the fixtures. Inside one of the ventilation grates above the bed, they found something chilling, a small hidden camera. The lens was shattered, but the memory card remained intact. Detective Grant had the card analyzed immediately. The footage was grainy, black and white, and recorded from a high angle. It showed the room as expected, tidy and decorated for the wedding night. At 11:46 p.m., Emily entered alone, no longer in her wedding dress, now wearing a simple white slip and robe. She paced the room, clearly distressed. She looked at her phone, sat on the edge of the bed, then stood up again. Her movements were erratic, her hands trembling. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The footage continued for 7 minutes. Then, at exactly 11:53 p.m., feed cut to static. When the screen resumed, just for a fraction of a second, the camera showed a blurry figure standing in the doorway. The outline was vague, indistinct, and almost unrecognizable. A tall figure, male, but the image flickered, then vanished. The lens had been broken. The person who destroyed the camera knew it was there. What made this discovery more troubling was the camera itself. The hotel had no record of installing it. The suite was private, and the grate showed no signs of recent disturbance. Whoever installed the device had done it well in advance. It suggested premeditation, surveillance, a predator watching, waiting. As this detail sank in, police reviewed hotel maintenance logs, access records, and staff schedules. No one reported entering the suite between midnight and 6 a.m., but one back door near the service elevator had been propped open during that time, triggering a silent alert that had never been followed up. And there was something else. Emily's robe, which she had been wearing in the footage, was missing from the room entirely. Not folded, not hung up, gone. Along with the veil she had removed earlier in the evening, the items weren't in Lost and Found. They weren't in the laundry chute. They had simply vanished. The room had been cleaned, yes, but not by hotel staff. Someone had entered, after Emily was last seen, and carefully erased the aftermath of whatever occurred. Enough to fool the initial investigation. Enough to delay the truth. And now, the blood under the bed wasn't just a clue. It was a quiet scream, hidden in plain sight, revealing that Emily hadn't simply disappeared. Something terrible had happened in that room, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one found out. Rachel Moore had been by Emily Carter's side since they were 12. They had shared everything: school dances, heartbreaks, college dorms, and eventually the wedding planning that was supposed to culminate in the happiest day of Emily's life. So when Emily vanished, Rachel became the unofficial spokesperson for the family, appearing beside them during press briefings, organizing search parties, and comforting guests who remained in shock. Her voice trembled during interviews. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights. She told anyone who would listen that Emily was like a sister to her. But Detective Leo Grant had been in homicide for over a decade, and he had seen grief before. Real grief. It was unpredictable, messy, but Rachel's mourning felt rehearsed. Her reactions were just the right amount of dramatic. Her tears came on cue. Her voice cracked in the same way every time she retold the story. Something wasn't sitting right. The inconsistencies began small. During her first interview, Rachel said she last saw Emily just after 11:30 p.m., outside the reception tent, when Emily said she was heading to her suite. But a guest, a cousin of Daniel's, remembered passing Rachel and Emily on the stone path behind the venue closer to midnight. They weren't walking quietly or exchanging hugs, they were arguing. Rachel's arms were crossed. Emily's voice was raised. The cousin didn't stop to listen, but the interaction was sharp enough to stick in his mind. He later told police, "It didn't look like a goodbye, it looked like a fight." Surveillance cameras caught only a shadowy clip of the pair walking toward the rear gardens, just before the trail that led back toward the hotel. After that, only Emily was seen again, entering the honeymoon suite alone. Detective Grant subpoenaed Rachel's phone records, expecting nothing more than call logs and text messages between friends. But something odd came up. A second number. A burner phone registered under a false name. The device had been active for 3 months, and pinged in the same locations as Rachel's personal phone nearly every time. It was clearly hers. By the time they recovered the physical device, most of its contents had been wiped clean. Still, digital forensics were able to retrieve fragments of text conversations. The messages were brief, coded, and incomplete, but what remained was enough to raise alarms. Messages like, "It ends tonight, be ready, and you promised me." And one sent just 2 hours before the wedding began, "We do this, and it's done for good." No contact name was assigned to the sender, but one number kept appearing. Investigators traced it to a prepaid phone purchased in cash, untraceable. The number went offline the day of the wedding, and hasn't been active since. Rachel was brought in for questioning. This time her demeanor changed. She wasn't weeping, she was cold, cautious, defensive. She refused to answer questions about the burner phone. She claimed it had been stolen. She denied sending the messages, even as forensic analysts proved the phone had connected to her home Wi-Fi just weeks before the wedding. Then came the final blow. During a quiet search of Rachel's apartment, officers discovered remnants of burned paper in her fireplace, unusual in July, with the temperatures soaring past 80 degrees. Among the ashes, investigators recovered something unmistakable. A partially melted ring with an engraved inscription, still visible under magnification. It was Emily's wedding ring. Why it was there, Rachel couldn't explain. She said she had no idea how it got into her fireplace. She said it must have been planted. But the excuses didn't matter, because now, the focus had shifted. Emily had vanished. Caleb was missing. Daniel had been drugged and locked in a trunk. But Rachel had evidence burning in her own home. And suddenly, the best friend, who vowed to stand by Emily until the end, looked more like someone who might have orchestrated it. 3 days after the wedding, just when the investigation seemed to be folding inward on itself, mired in secrets, missing persons, and half-buried truths, fate delivered its most unexpected twist. A 911 call came in just after dawn. A silver Toyota Corolla had swerved off a rural road 20 miles outside Rosehill and crashed into a drainage ditch. The car had no plates. It had been reported stolen from a gas station outside town 2 nights earlier. The driver was unconscious but alive. When paramedics pried open the driver's door, they found him slumped over the wheel, bleeding from a head wound. He didn't have a license on him, but his fingerprints told the story. Caleb Price. He was taken to Mercy Regional Hospital, under police guard. Doctors confirmed he had suffered a moderate concussion and multiple bruised ribs. But more crucially, he was stable. Detectives arrived at the hospital within hours, waiting for any moment when Caleb might open his eyes and speak. They had questions, too many questions, and the man at the center of them was lying sedated under bright lights and beeping monitors. But it wasn't Caleb's injuries that stunned investigators. It was what they found in the back seat of the stolen car. A bridal veil, white, delicate, slightly torn, was balled up under a jacket in the floorboard. Next to it, a small heart-shaped locket engraved with the initials EC. Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs. One of Emily as a child, the other of her and Rachel laughing at the beach. DNA on the veil matched Emily's. The presence of her belongings in Caleb's car seemed damning. Detectives believed they were one step closer to closing the case. To the public, it painted a straightforward picture. Caleb had taken Emily, stashed her somewhere, and tried to flee. But to Detective Leo Grant, it felt too simple. One detail especially bothered him. There were no signs of Emily ever being in the vehicle. No fingerprints, no hair, no blood, just those two items oddly placed, as if they had been planted. It raised a chilling question. Was Caleb being framed? Even stranger was what they found inside the car's trunk. Nothing violent, no tools or ropes, just a single black hoodie and a prepaid phone with a dead battery. When charged, the device showed only a few messages. Most had been wiped, but one message remained in the drafts folder, never sent. It read, "You lied to me. You said she'd be safe." Who had he been talking to? The mystery deepened when Caleb's belongings were examined. In the small duffel bag he had carried with him, police found an old photograph, dog-eared and worn. It showed Caleb and Emily, taken nearly 10 years ago during a camping trip. Emily was smiling, but Caleb wasn't. He looked tired, almost haunted. Why was he carrying that picture? What was his real connection to her now, after all these years? Doctors kept Caleb under sedation for observation, but one thing was certain: he hadn't left town. He had lingered. He had watched. Maybe waited. But for what? And then came the forensic bombshell. The fingerprints on the trunk of Daniel Rivers' Jaguar, where he had been locked in and left for dead, had earlier been dismissed as partial and unreadable. But a breakthrough in enhancement software allowed the lab to reconstruct part of a print from the exterior handle. It wasn't Caleb's. It was Rachel Moore's. The moment the results were confirmed, detectives realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a jealous ex-lover acting alone. Caleb may have been involved, yes, but he wasn't at the center of the storm. Someone else had been pulling strings. Someone close, trusted. And yet, the most haunting truth remained. Emily was still missing. The blood in the suite said she had been hurt. The veil and locket said she had been moved. But where she was, or if she was even alive, was a question no one could answer. Not yet. Daniel Rivers had spent 4 days in a fog, drifting in and out of sedation, with doctors monitoring his brain activity and fluid levels. The drug in his system, a heavy anesthetic used in surgeries, had caused temporary memory loss, and for a while he couldn't recall anything after the wedding ceremony. But on the 5th morning, as the sunlight cut through the hospital blinds and his body began to recover, something shifted. Slowly, fragments of that night began surfacing in his mind, scattered and jagged like broken glass. At first it was just noise, the clinking of glass, a door creaking, then the sensation of cold tile under his hands. He remembered being led through a hallway, and voices. 2 of them. One was clearly male, the other, familiar, soft, but filled with urgency. That voice haunted him. It wasn't Emily's. As Detective Grant sat at Daniel's bedside, hoping for anything useful, Daniel suddenly looked up and whispered, "She wasn't alone." That was the moment everything turned. Daniel's memories were incomplete, but they painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had expected. He recalled returning to the suite just before midnight, expecting to find Emily waiting, but instead, he found someone else already inside. Rachel. She was nervous, holding a glass of champagne. She had told him Emily wanted to meet him privately, and that she'd stepped away for just a minute. But Daniel couldn't remember anything after taking a sip from the glass Rachel handed him. The implication was chilling. Rachel had drugged him. Investigators immediately dove into Daniel's financial records and communications, looking for anything that might explain why Rachel would have done such a thing. That's when they discovered a series of wire transfers, small at first, then larger, and finally, just 1 week before the wedding, a lump sum of $50,000 wired to an offshore account under Rachel Moore's name. There was no good reason for the transfer. Daniel couldn't explain it. At first he claimed ignorance, but as more records came to light, encrypted emails, discreet calls, and deleted texts, retrieved from cloud backups, the narrative changed. Daniel had been involved with Rachel. It had started 6 months before the wedding, according to the recovered messages. The affair was brief, and according Daniel, a mistake. He ended it and promised to keep it a secret to protect Emily, but Rachel hadn't moved on. The messages took a darker tone over time. She said Emily didn't deserve him. She hinted at secrets Emily had kept. She threatened to tell everyone. The $50,000 was hush money. Daniel admitted he'd paid her to disappear from his life before the wedding, but she hadn't. Instead, she showed up at every fitting, every planning meeting, every cake tasting, smiling beside Emily, pretending to be her best friend. Meanwhile, she was quietly unraveling everything behind the scenes. Detectives now believed Rachel had manipulated both Daniel and Caleb. She had used Emily's past with Caleb to stir old emotions. To create a convenient suspect, it was likely she had reached out to Caleb pretending to be Emily, rekindling something long extinguished, and luring him back to town. She wanted him close, useful, and disposable. But that still didn't explain everything. There was no motive yet for murder, no confirmed sighting of Emily. And despite the evidence stacking up, there was still no body. The final twist in this chapter came when a forensics officer, reviewing the hotel's back door access logs, noticed something strange. At 12:06 a.m. on the night of the wedding, a staff keycard, assigned to Rachel during her help with planning period, had been used to access the basement level of the hotel. The door led to a service corridor that most guests didn't even know existed, and it hadn't been accessed in years. Now everything pointed downward beneath the hotel, into the shadows, into whatever secret Rachel had hidden underneath the celebration. The door to the basement level of the hotel had long been forgotten, hidden behind a rolling shelf of catering equipment and rarely used since the building's renovations years earlier. Only a few staff members even knew it existed, and fewer had a reason to access it. But the access logs didn't lie. Rachel Moore's keycard had opened that door just after midnight on the night of Emily's disappearance. It was the only entry registered for the entire year. Detective Leo Grant personally led the search of the area. The staircase was narrow and steep, the air below damp and stale, dust covered most surfaces, undisturbed for what seemed like decades. But halfway down the corridor, behind a stack of broken chairs and discarded tablecloths, a small square section of flooring caught Grant's eye. It was slightly cleaner than the surrounding area, recently shifted. A crowbar was brought in. With some effort, the false panel lifted, revealing a dark crawl space beneath the floor. It was barely large enough to fit a person. The air that escaped was suffocating, heavy with the smell of rot. Inside, wrapped in a torn sheet and partially covered in earth and concrete dust, was a woman's body. Emily Carter had been there all along. The room fell into silence. Even seasoned officers stood still, the horror of the discovery weighing heavily on their shoulders. For days, she had been just beneath their feet, buried under celebration, toasts, and whispers. Her wedding night had ended not with a getaway or a tragedy in the woods, but with her murder, hidden in the very place she was supposed to begin a new life. An autopsy was conducted immediately. The results were sobering. Emily had died from blunt force trauma to the side of her head, inflicted by a heavy object. Defensive wounds were found on her hands and arms, showing she had fought back. There were no drugs in her system. She had been fully aware, conscious, and terrified in her final moments. DNA evidence collected from beneath her fingernails confirmed what investigators had already begun to suspect. The match was conclusive. Rachel Moore. Faced with the evidence, Rachel initially refused to speak, but her silence didn't matter anymore. The trail was clear. Investigators found traces of concrete dust on the soles of Rachel's shoes in her apartment. In her storage outfit, they recovered a claw hammer wrapped in plastic and stained with Emily's blood. The burner phone she had tried to erase provided one more damning message, time-stamped 11:39 p.m. on the wedding night. "It's done. I handled it. We're free." But the phone had never been sent, it remained in the drafts folder, as if she had hesitated, one final moment of doubt before everything unraveled. During Rachel's trial, the full story came to light. She had fallen in love with Daniel and believed Emily was standing in the way of the life she deserved. What began as an affair turned into obsession. The payment from Daniel was never enough. Rachel didn't want money. She wanted Emily gone, forever. And she was willing to manipulate, deceive, and kill to make it happen. The plot had been carefully constructed. She lured Caleb back into Emily's orbit, hoping his presence would raise suspicions and muddy the timeline. She drugged Daniel, staged the scene to make it look like he'd been attacked, then moved Emily's body in the early hours of the morning, using her insider knowledge of the venue and hotel staff schedules to avoid being seen. Rachel was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Caleb, upon awakening from his coma, was cleared of charges, though the emotional weight of his manipulation would haunt him for the rest of his life. Daniel walked free but withdrew from public life completely, his name forever linked to the most chilling wedding night in Rosehill history. The venue closed permanently. Locals still avoid the road leading to the hotel, and every year on the anniversary of the wedding, someone leaves white roses at the edge of the old service door. No note, no message, just a silent tribute to the bride who vanished into the night and the darkness that had been waiting all along.